All right. Test, test. Test, test. Test, test. Test, test. That's good. Okay. All right, I guess we'll get started. So we're in the first chapter of Daniel. We didn't get very far last week, so I think I'll just start back at verse 3 and just hit a few things and catch back up to where we were last week. So just to kind of reiterate what's happening here in the first chapter. So Daniel and a lot of other children were taken by Babylon. We went through all this in the introduction. So Babylon came through, and Nebuchadnezzar defeats Egypt at a battle in what would be in modern-day Turkey, right on the border of Turkey and Syria, at a place called Carchemish in 609. I think that's right, 609 BC, somewhere in there. And right after that battle, he then is going to go. 609 is when Josiah dies. So that would be, it's 605. So in 605, Nebuchadnezzar is not the king at that point. He's the lead general. He's his father's main general. And he's leading a battle against Egypt at a place called Carchemish, which is on the border of Syria and Turkey, modern-day Syria, Turkey. And he defeats Egypt at that battle, and then once he defeats them, he's going to start coming south down the Mediterranean coast, and he's going to go towards Judah. And why would he go towards Judah? It's because Egypt had put a vassal king on the throne of Judah, so Babylon perceived Judah as being an ally of Egypt. And so he's going to go down and defeat Judah at that time. And so in the process of doing that, his father dies and he becomes king at that time. So what he's doing, and this is what they always do back then, so when you defeat a country, you take certain people and you take them back to your country. And so he would take basically the best and brightest and take them back to Babylon. So when he's taking these kids back to Babylon, it's not just Daniel and his 3 friends. It's going to be a bunch of kids from the country of Aram, a bunch of kids from Judah, some kids from Egypt, and possibly some other countries in that area as well. So all these kids, and the kids that are specifically referring to in this chapter are the kids who are children of the noble families or the king. So royal kids, princes, or nobility. And so Daniel and his 3 friends come from that line. So they're either children of the royal family or they're children of nobles, okay? And so at this time, Daniel and his friends, they're probably going to be about 14 or 15 years old, and they're taken to Babylon. And so as you kind of read through this chapter and even into the next chapter, kind of put yourself into that mindset of what would you be thinking if you were a 15-year-old kid and you got abducted from your family, taken 900 miles away to the world power of the time and the most ruthless king of the time, and how would you react if you're forced to be put into that situation? Because there's several ways you can look at it. One, a common way they viewed things back then is that if your country was destroyed or defeated in battle, then that meant your God was not as powerful as the God of the country that defeated you. And so it'd be very easy for the kids from Judah to say, well, the Babylonian gods must be stronger than Yahweh, therefore we will no longer follow Yahweh and we'll just follow the gods of Babylon. And as you read through the story, it only mentions 4 individuals, which suggests that probably the other kids, that's exactly what they did. They just fell in line with what was going on in Babylon, and they gave up their faith in the process. It doesn't say that, but the fact that it only mentions these 4 leads you to believe that that may have been what happened. So as we're reading through some of this, just kind of picture yourself in that situation. And so what's going to end up happening is all these kids are going to be put into a school, essentially, and they're going to be trained in a bunch of this stuff that we'll talk about in a second. So that's kind of what's going to be happening here in chapter 1. Okay, so we'll pick up at verse 3, and it says, "The king instructed Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs," and I think I mentioned last week, the word doesn't necessarily mean a eunuch in the traditional sense of the word. It just means somebody that's head over the government officials. Could be a eunuch, but doesn't have to be a eunuch. So it says, "To bring some of the children of Israel and some of the king's descendants and some of the nobles, young men in whom there were," and so these are the qualifications that these kids had to meet to become part of this kind of elite training school that they're going to be put into. So they have to have no blemish, that means no physical defects. They have to be good looking, gifted in all wisdom, so they have to be intelligent and wise, possessing knowledge and quick to understand, who had ability to serve in the king's palace. And that means they already had understanding of proper etiquette before a king, which they would because they're all from families of kings or families of nobles, so they know how to act in that kind of situation. "And whom they might teach the language and literature of the Chaldeans." So this is kind of the first thing it's going to indicate that they're supposed to learn in this school situation. So the schooling, and it's going to mention this in a second, the schooling is going to last for about 3 years. So they bring all these kids, they stick them into Babylon, and then they put them into school with the purpose of training them in all the ways of the Babylonians, so that once they graduate from the school, the king can decide what role he wants them to play in his government, okay? And so he mentions 2 things here that they're going to learn, which is the language and literature of the Chaldeans. Now he's going to mention some other stuff in a minute, and I'll just go ahead and tell you now all the stuff that they typically learn. So one is the literature and the language. So obviously the kids from Judah grew up speaking Hebrew. They're going to now learn how to speak Aramaic, which is kind of a universal language for all the Middle East at the time, as well as Akkadian, which Akkadian is the language of Assyria and Babylon, but it is also a universal language for the Middle East at that time. So they learn Aramaic and Akkadian, and then obviously later on, once Babylon falls to the Persians, if they're still alive, they'll need to learn Persian at that point. Okay, and then as far as the literature goes, they're going to have to learn all the religious text of Babylon. They're going to have to learn all the fables and all that stuff that goes along with it. And then on top of that stuff, they're going to learn a lot of things that are fairly typical of school, literature, math, whatever science they had at the time. But they're also going to learn a lot of religious stuff that's pertinent to Babylon, and that's things more like omens, things like speaking to spirits, witchcraft, interpreting dreams, all this kind of stuff. Okay, so a lot of stuff that's condemned in the Torah that the people of God were never supposed to do, witchcraft, sorcery, necromancy, all that kind of stuff is all part of the religion of Babylon. And so they're going to have to learn how to do this stuff. Okay, now that doesn't mean they participate in it. It just means it's part of their schooling education that they're expected to learn. Okay. So that's what they're going to be thrust into, and they're going to spend somewhere in the 2 to 3 year range learning all this kind of stuff. Okay, so verse 5, it says, "And the king appointed for them a daily provision of the king's delicacies and of the wine which he drank, and 3 years of training for them." So that's where it tells you how long the school is. "So that at the end of that time," meaning at the end of the 3 years, "they might serve before the king." So what would happen is at the end of the 3 years of school, you would appear before Nebuchadnezzar. He would basically decide how he wanted to implement you into his government, okay, based on your talents and how you did in school and so forth. All right, so now it's going to introduce us to the four main characters. And it says, now from among those of the sons of Judah, so remember, this is just these four, but in fact, it's telling you these are the special four of the whole group. So this is kind of like the valedictorians of the school, okay, as opposed to the other kids from Judah, Aram, Egypt, and all the other countries they took kids from. These are the four best. All right, so the four are Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And to them the chief of the eunuchs gave names. He gave Daniel the name Belteshazzar, to Hananiah Shadrach, to Mishael Meshach, and to Azariah Abednego. Now the names are actually significant, so I'm going to take the time to tell you what these names actually mean. So we talked about this in the introduction. So Daniel's name is a very old name, dates back, well, I'll just say it's old. So Daniel, if you don't remember, the first part, the D-A-N part of Daniel means judge. The I is how you claim possession in Hebrew, so it means my. So like for us, we put like an apostrophe S on a word to say it's ours or something, but in Hebrew you stick an I on the end. And that's basically showing ownership. So judge, my, and then the EL is God. So when you stick all that together, what it means is God is my judge, okay? So you're taking the guy whose name is God is my judge, and you change his name to Belteshazzar. What is actually happening here? This may be more than you care to know. What Daniel is doing, these are not their actual names. He is transliterating the Akkadian name into a Hebrew word. So if you actually look at the Akkadian name, it's not pronounced exactly the same, but that's probably more than you care to know. So the Hebrew transliteration of the name is Belteshazzar, and that name means, it means to protect his life is what the Shazar part means, but the Bel on the front is either the god Bel or the god Marduk, okay? So you're changing the name of Daniel from God as my judge, which is the Hebrew God, to the Babylonian God, where his name means Bel, protect his life, okay? So you're taking the one true deity out of the name and you're sticking the false deity into his name, which actually happens with all four of these kids, okay? So you're removing Yahweh out of their names and you're sticking a Babylonian god's name into their name. All right, so the name Hananiah means, anytime you see the AH on the end of a Hebrew name, that means that's a short version of Yah, so you can just look at that and already know that Yahweh is in the name. So Hananiah means Yahweh is gracious, and his name is changed to Shadrach, which means command of Aku, and Aku is their moon god, okay? So you're taking the name Yahweh out of his name and you're sticking their moon god into his name, all right? And then Mishael, anytime you see El on the end of a Hebrew name, that means God. So Mishael means his name means who is what God is. It's like the name Michael. So Michael means who is like God. And Mishael means who is what God is. They're both rhetorical questions, meaning nobody is like God or nobody is like who God is. So you change the name from that to Meshach, which means the exact same thing but with a different God. So you're going from who is what God is to who is what Aku is, okay? So again, the same idea, take Yahweh out, slap another fake god in. And then Azariah, his name means Yahweh has helped, and his name it's maybe misspelled because there isn't a god that's known that's named Negu, which the name is actually Abed-Nego. So Abed means servant or servant of, and so that would be servant of this god named Nego. But it's probably Nebo is what it should be, or Nebu, which is one of their gods. Nebu is the first part of Nebuchadnezzar's name, and his father Nabopolassar as well. So if that's what it is, then it means his name goes from Yahweh has helped to servant of Nabu or Nebu. Anyway, so the idea with all four of these, they all had Yahweh or God in their name. Now they all have a fake Babylonian god in their name, okay? Now they didn't have any choice in these names or having their name changed or anything like that. But anyway, these are the names that they are given. Does anybody have any questions on their names? Okay. All right, so all four of the boys have their names changed. So verse 8, so what we know so far, they're stuck into a school, and the king actually assigns to them a daily amount of food. So the food they're getting is chosen by Nebuchadnezzar himself, okay? And it's the same food that he actually gets. So this is a high honor for them to be getting this food that they're getting. All right, verse 8, it says, "But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's delicacies, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the chief of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself." So why would eating this food and drinking the wine defile him? Well, it's multiple reasons. So in their diet, a lot of what they would eat was pork and horse meat, both of which was not kosher. So they weren't supposed to eat that. So some of the issue is some of the food is not allowed from the covenant. Another part of it is some of it could be allowed by the covenant, but it wasn't prepared properly, therefore it was not allowed. But even if it was allowed food and food that was prepared properly, the other issue, which for the wine in particular, is all this food was originally offered to an idol before it came to them to eat. And so all of the food was a violation of God's covenant with them in some form or fashion, which is why Daniel doesn't want any of it, nor do the other three, because they don't want to defile themselves. Now notice, these are the only four who stood up and said, "We don't want this food," which implies that all the other kids just went along with it, okay? So they did not want to stand up for what was right, but these four did. Now, why is this courageous to do this? Well, one, this is a direct insult to Nebuchadnezzar, okay? You don't really want to insult the most powerful guy in the world, not to mention the fact that he is somewhat impulsive and exceedingly cruel. In other words, if he would have found out that they did this, he would have killed them on the spot, okay? So what are some other examples of cruel things he did? Well, just in the book itself, he's going to throw them in the lion's den in a little while because he gets mad. But does anybody know what he did to the last king of Judah? So the very last king, so this is before what we're reading now is in 605. This isn't going to happen until 586, so 20 years later, roughly. But the last king of Judah, which is Zedekiah, he gets mad because Zedekiah revolts against him, so he goes to Jerusalem, lays siege against the city, and then he eventually captures Zedekiah. And he's so frustrated with Zedekiah that he captures him and makes him stand and watch while he assassinates all his sons. And then as soon as he's done assassinating all of his sons, he puts his eyes out, so that the last thing Zedekiah ever saw on this world was watching his sons get executed by Nebuchadnezzar. Okay, this is the type of guy this guy is, all right? He has no qualms whatsoever about killing people. In fact, he's going to start killing people in the next chapter, or at least threatening to. So he doesn't care if these kids live or die. He's not worried about killing them if they insult him. So this would be viewed as an insult to him if he found out, okay? So that's one thing. Two, though, it's going to set these 4 kids apart. Even if Nebuchadnezzar doesn't find out, the chief eunuch is going to know. There's another guy that's going to come in here in a minute. They're all going to know. Plus the other kids are going to know, right? So the other kids are going to look at them like, why are you doing this, and so forth. So it sets them apart from everybody else, which could be a bad thing depending on what ends up happening. And it also, they could easily be tempted not to do this, right? So if you're 15 years old and you're 900 miles away from your parents, what do most kids do? Whatever they want. Okay, they don't care what their parents say, because their parents aren't there. So there's no trouble or consequences for violating what your parents told you to do if your parents aren't there, nor will you ever see them again, because these kids are never going to see their parents again. Okay, so that, you're fighting that temptation. You're also fighting the temptation of, do I really want to follow Yahweh anymore? Yahweh obviously did not protect me from being taken into captivity. So is he really a God, or was I following a fake God, and now I'm in Babylon? Maybe I should just follow their gods. And so all these thoughts are probably going through Daniel and the other three's mind, but can you imagine being 15 and just putting your foot down and saying, I'm not going to violate my covenant with Yahweh. I'm going to stand up and do what's right, and if Nebuchadnezzar kills me, he just kills me. And that's a really impressive lesson to take away from these 4, which is why they're the only 4 mentioned in the book. Okay, so we are in verse 9. All right, so it says, now God had brought Daniel. Now notice who gives Daniel the favor, all right? So it's about to say Daniel got in favor with the chief eunuch. But God is the one behind this, right? So even though Daniel and his friends are doing the right thing, God is the one who makes sure that they get blessed as a result of it, okay? So God is going to give them favor. So it says, now God had brought Daniel into the favor of and goodwill of the chief of the eunuchs. So in other words, what it's saying is the chief eunuch, he actually likes these 4 kids, likes them better than the other kids. And so he's listening to what they have to say. But here's his response, verse 10. It says, and the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who has appointed your food and drink, for why should he see your faces looking worse than the young men who are your age? Then you would endanger my head before the king. So in other words, what he's saying is, why would I want to let you do this? Because if you're not eating the food that he wants you to eat, and you start to look sick, he is going to ask me, why do you look sick? And I can't lie to him. And so if I tell him, you look sick because I let you not eat the food that I was supposed to give you, then what's going to happen to the chief eunuch? He's going to get executed, okay? Nebuchadnezzar doesn't have a lot of qualms about executing people, all right? So he's going to get killed if this is what happens. So you can see, no matter how much he likes these kids, he doesn't like them as well as he likes himself, okay? So he's not really keen on this idea. So let's see what happens. So verse 11, so Daniel said to the steward, so this is a different guy, so he said to the steward whom the chief of the eunuchs had set over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, please test your servants for 10 days and let them give us vegetables to eat and water to drink. So they talked to a lesser dude than Ashapaz, and they talk him into letting them have a different diet, okay? Now it says that they're going to have vegetables. That's slightly misleading. what the word means is anything produced from a seed, okay? So this is vegetables, fruit, grain, any kind of bread, okay? So it's not like they're just eating broccoli all day, okay? Which couldn't survive 3 hours on. So this is, sounds like a high carb diet to me, which may be why they look fatter than the other kids, which we're gonna see here in a minute. But apparently that was an attractive quality at that time. So whatever. Anyway, so they're gonna go on this diet. So verse 13, it says, "Then let our appearance be examined before you and the appearance of the young men who eat the portion of the king's delicacies. And as you see fit, so deal with your servants." So he consented with them in this matter and tested them 10 days. Okay, so they're going to do this 10-day diet plan. So verse 15, "And at the end of 10 days, their features appeared better and fatter in flesh than all the young men who ate the portion of the king's delicacies. Thus the steward took away their portion of delicacies and the wine that they were to drink and gave them vegetables." So basically, their plan worked, and they got to then be on this kosher diet instead of the diet that they were trying to be fed. But it's all because God was with them, and God allowed this to happen. Okay, so verse 17, it says, "As for these 4 young men, God gave them knowledge." So we're about to see how that they're blessed, but keep this in mind. God is the one that's giving them these skills, okay? It's not because of their own inherent talents, although I'm sure they had a lot of talents. And remember, these are all royal or noble kids. They're not dumb, nor have they not had any education to this point. So they would be intelligent and previously educated children anyway. But it says, "As for these 4 young men, God gave them knowledge and skill in all the literature and wisdom. And Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams." So the key thing to notice here is all 4 of them, God gave something to, which is gave them knowledge and skill in the literature and wisdom. But only one of the 4 got an additional gift from God. And what is the gift he got? It's understanding in all visions and dreams. Now, this is really significant because in the ancient Near East, the single most prized skill anybody could have is dream interpretation, okay? So in the ancient Near East, the people thought, and particularly the king thought, that the way the gods communicated with humans was through a dream. But you had to be able to interpret the dream to know what the gods were trying to tell you, okay? And so this is one of the skills that they're going to learn in this 3-year school program. But Daniel is going to be more skilled at it than anybody else. And the key thing is other people learn about it, but it's made up. And I'll tell you what I mean in a minute. But Daniel's is real. His gift is real. So what they would do, and they found copies of these books written in Akkadian, so they know that this is a reality, is they actually had textbooks back at the time about how to interpret a dream. And so it would have something like, if the dream has this symbol in it, then the symbol means X, okay? And so if someone told you their dream, then you could just flip to the book and be like, oh, it had this symbol in it, and this symbol in it, and this symbol in it, and you stick all that together, and you're like, then the dream means this. But the problem with that is it's all baloney, right? Because none of it's real. It's just them making up stuff, just like astrology isn't real, and horoscopes aren't real, and all that stuff, but people believe in it, right? So if you believe in it, it's your reality, even though it's false. And so that is what's happening. So they're being taught this stuff in school, taught how to take a dream, take your textbook, stick it together, and come up with some interpretation. But that's not the gift that Daniel has, because anybody can do that, right, if you study it. Daniel actually has the gift to actually really interpret the dream, okay? And so that's very different. And that's going to be a key thing that's going to come up here in chapter 2. All right, so verse 18, it says, now at the end of the days, meaning at the end of so they're graduating school. Okay, the graduation is you stand before Nebuchadnezzar, and he decides what he wants to do with you. Okay, that's what this is. So it says, when the king had said that they should be brought in, the chief of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. Then the king interviewed them, so it's like the oral exam here at the end. And among them all, none was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore they served before the king. So in other words, they did the best out of all the kids in the program that year. So verse 20, and in all manners of wisdom and understanding about which the king examined them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers who were in his realm. Thus Daniel continued until the first year of King Cyrus. So I'll take the last thing first, and then I'll go backwards. So that last verse, Daniel's just putting that in there to let you know, hey, I lived through the entire Babylonian period and into the Persian period, which is the next kingdom to come. And so he's probably about 15 when he went into Babylon and into the school. If the school lasted 3 years, now he would be about 18 when he stands before Nebuchadnezzar to find out what his job is going to be. But what he is telling you in that last verse is he lives at least to 535 BC, which is when the Persians knock off the Babylonians. So he's going to live to be at least 85 or 90 years old. Okay, that's what that's telling you. Now, if you back up, what the other verses are telling you is that these 4 boys did better, way better, than all the other kids in the program, and they shined before Nebuchadnezzar. Now, he mentions 2 terms here, and he's going to mention 2 more at the very beginning of chapter 2. And I'll just hit them all together because they all have different Hebrew words, which all come from different Akkadian words, which I know none of you care about. So I'll just tell you what all of them collectively mean instead of telling you what each one of them individually means. So these are going to be 4 different groups of people that Daniel or the other 3 could be assigned into this category, right? So they're standing before Nebuchadnezzar, and he's going to decide, okay, you're going to be the trash guy, you're going to be the astrologer, whatever. So he's going to assign them to different tasks. So these 4 categories are going to be 4 of the possibilities for jobs they could go into. They all have overlap, and so the gist of it is this. They're all spiritual type jobs. And so some of them lean a little more in one direction or the other, but the gist of it is, so part of it is astrology. So that means looking at the stars, charting the stars, and based on the movement of the stars and the moons and the comet and all that stuff, you can make predictions based on the celestial body movements, okay? And they were very skilled at this. They kept excellent records. And they actually determined exactly how long a year lasted down to within about 20 minutes of the actual time. So they got really, really good at looking at the stars, but then they would make up interpretations off the stars for what kind of prophecies they might mean or whatever. So that's one category. Another category is casting spells. Not exactly like Harry Potter, but a little bit. So they would cast spells. Usually they were intended to be good spells, so things to help the king or whatever. So occasionally, though, some of them would drift off into black magic, and they would issue curse spells upon people. So that is one category. There's another category where they're like necromancers, where they would try to talk to the dead or to spirits or things like that to gain information and so forth. So it's a lot of different, what you might call religious, false religion type stuff, mysticism, spiritualism, talking to spirits. Another thing they would do is extapaxy, which is where you would kill an animal, pull its organs out, and based on the appearance of the organ, you could make predictions about future events and so forth. So a lot of that kind of stuff, okay? So that's some of the stuff they were taught in the school, and these are a couple of the different categories of Nebuchadnezzar's advisors that these kids could be put in these roles, okay? All right, so he mentions two of them there in verse 20, which are the magicians and the astrologers, okay? So when it says magicians, it doesn't mean they do magic tricks. It means they do some of this other type stuff. Okay, so chapter 2. Now, in the second year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, I'll just briefly say a word about this. So the way that they do dating back then gets very confusing. Because so you may say, well, if this is year 2 of his reign and Daniel had to go through a 3-year program, then that would mean Daniel's still in the program during year 2 of his reign. And it actually doesn't mean that, and I'm not going to take 20 minutes to explain all that to you. Just take my word. He's probably already graduated, and now he is a graduate, and he is now in some kind of government role. And it does make sense, but it's not worth me taking the time to explain the dating stuff. Okay, so in the second year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, and his spirit was so troubled that his sleep left him. Okay, so in other words, he has a dream in the middle of the night, and he wakes up from the dream, and the dream freaked him out so much that he couldn't go back to sleep. That's kind of what it's saying, okay? Now, what is the most prized talent of all the stuff you could learn in school? Dream interpretation or interpreting visions, either one, okay? So, who do you think is going to be called on here? Because the only guy in the whole kingdom that can really do this is Daniel. We already know that, all right? So you know Daniel's going to be coming into the story here in a minute. All right, so verse 2, then the king gave the command to call the magicians, the astrologers. So we already heard about those two. Here comes 2 more categories, the sorcerers and the Chaldeans, to tell his dreams. The translation Chaldeans is both correct and yet unfortunate at the same time. So the word is kasdim in Hebrew. It can describe a group of people so the word Chaldeans is an older word that just means Babylonians, okay? It's the same thing, same place, same country, same people, but over time the term Chaldeans has fallen away and people use the term Babylonians now. And so when you read that and you think about it that way, it's like, well, that doesn't make sense. He called these sorcerers and stuff, and then he just called the whole country, I guess. It's kind of the way it looks. It isn't that. It's another category of like a sorcerer, an astrologer, that kind of thing. So it's 4 different categories of guys who serve in his administration, basically. All right, so it says, so they came and stood before the king, and the king said to them, I have had a dream, and my spirit is anxious to know the dream. Okay, so here's what's going on. So the king has a really bad dream in the middle of the night. He wakes up, he's freaked out, and he doesn't go back to sleep. And so he's laying in his bed and he's thinking, how can I get this dream interpreted? Because remember, in their way of thinking, a dream like this is a message from the gods to you. But you have to get it interpreted to know what it means. But he's already telling you something about the nature of the dream, because he wouldn't be freaked out if he thought the dream had a good message, okay? So he's telling you up front, he's worried about the interpretation of this thing. So what would make a king worried about an interpretation of a dream? Remember, how many years has he been king? 2, 3, depending on how you want to count the years, but anyway, it's 2 or 3 years, okay? What often happens in the ancient Near East to kings, particularly early in their reign, if they're not popular? You get assassinated, okay? So what do you think he thinks the dream might actually be about? Getting assassinated. Who usually does the assassinating? Somebody in your administration, okay? He's worried there's a coup being plotted against him by somebody in the administration. So he thinks, how can I figure out who the plotter is, all right? And this is his tactic he comes up with. So verse 4, he says, then the Chaldeans spoke to the king in Aramaic, and this is where the book switches from Hebrew to Aramaic, okay? It says, O king, live forever. That's a standard greeting that you gave to the king, okay? It's a way of sucking up. So it says, tell your servants the dream, and we will give the interpretation. All right, so right off the bat, if the king has a dream, and he tells you the dream, all you have to do is flip your textbook and tell him what the dream means, right? But the king knows that, okay? And does he have any faith that their interpretation is real? I mean, they can make up anything and tell him whatever they want him to believe, and he knows that, all right? So he's worried about this dream. He's worried about what it means, and he doesn't want them to just tell them anything, okay? He wants the truth, not some made-up interpretation. So verse 5, the king answered and said to the Chaldeans, my decision is firm. If you do not make known the dream to me and its interpretation, you shall be cut in pieces. In other words, I'm going to dismember you. This guy's ruthless, all right? So he's not playing around. That was the second bell, right? Okay, I'll just finish this thought. He's ruthless, and he has no qualms about killing off his whole administration, all in one fell swoop. Especially if he thinks a coup is on the line. So he says, you either tell me the dream and the interpretation, or I'm going to kill you all, and I'm going to turn your house into, I don't know what the translation there says, but literally what it means is a dunghill or a trash dump, okay? Either one. So he's basically saying, I'm going to kill you all, and I'm going to not only kill you, but I'm going to make sure I destroy your house so your family has nothing, okay? So in other words, don't mess around. You either tell me the truth or you're going to die. And we'll stop there for now. Does anybody have any questions or comments? All right. I'll see you guys next week.